Back in 2016, I was stationed as a private security guard at a remote forest outpost in northern Alberta. The place was basically a small research station, one wooden cabin surrounded by miles of pine trees used by biologists to study animal migration. They collected camera footage, temperature data, and tracking information. It wasn't much, just a fenced perimeter and a main cabin with a single backup generator. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, only a pair of radios that worked half the time, and a landline that was more for decoration than actual use. My job was simple: stay overnight, patrol the perimeter every hour, and make sure no animals messed with the equipment. It sounded peaceful when I first took it, like a paid camping trip. But peace out there is different. It's not silence, it's pressure. The kind that builds until you start hearing your own heartbeat too loudly. The first couple of nights were fine. I kept a small fire going near the cabin porch and logged my patrols in a notebook. The forest had a rhythm, the distant calls of owls, the constant chirp of crickets, the occasional rustle of deer moving through brush. After a while, those sounds became comforting. They let me know I wasn't alone out there. But then came the night that changed everything. It was late, maybe around 2:45 a.m., when I noticed the forest had gone completely quiet. It wasn't gradual, either. One minute, the night was alive with sound, and the next, nothing. Like someone had pressed mute on the world. No wind, no insects, not even the creak of trees swaying. At first, I thought maybe a predator had wandered close. A bear or a wolf, maybe. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold air biting my face. My breath came out in thick white clouds. The beam from my light cut through the mist, catching bits of frost still clinging to the grass. I took a few steps off the porch, listening. That's when I heard it. Faint, deliberate crunching. Footsteps. They were slow, careful, too rhythmic to be an animal. "Hey," I shouted into the dark. "Who's there?" The sound stopped. I scanned the tree line, but the fog was too thick to see more than 20 feet ahead. I started walking toward the sound, sweeping my flashlight side to side. Each step I took crunched through the frost. And then about 3 seconds later, I heard the same sound again. Crunch. Exactly matching mine. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took one step backward. Crunch. That's when the realization hit me. Whatever it was mimicking me. Perfectly. My first instinct was to call it out. Maybe it was one of the biologists trying to mess with me. But no one was supposed to be there that week. The entire team had gone back to the city for supplies. I was completely alone. The floodlights flickered. The sudden bursts of light made the fog seem alive, like it was moving. My heart started hammering. I aimed my flashlight straight at the tree line, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, standing perfectly still between the trees. From that distance, it looked human, but wrong. Too tall, too narrow. Its arms hung too long, the fingers nearly reaching its knees. It wasn't moving, just facing me. I took a shaky step back toward the cabin. The air felt heavy, colder. My breath fogged thickly in front of my face, and I swear I could smell something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Then the floodlights flickered again and went out. The darkness swallowed everything. For a second, I couldn't see a thing. My flashlight beam jittered as I tried to steady my hand. The trees were just shadows now, endless and black. I clicked my radio. "Base, this is Outpost 9, I said, trying to sound calm. "I've got movement outside the perimeter." "Do you copy? Static?" Then a voice, faint, almost too quiet. "You shouldn't have looked." I froze. The voice wasn't anyone I knew. It was soft, distorted, almost like it came through water. "Who is this?" I said, louder now. Silence, then movement. The figure stepped forward, one long, slow stride. It crossed at least 6 feet in a single step. I ran. I sprinted back toward the cabin, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the ground. The cold air burned my lungs. I could hear my own footsteps pounding. And then behind me, faint but matching perfectly, another set echoing mine. I didn't look back. I slammed the cabin door shut and locked it, pressing my back against it as my chest heaved. My radio crackled again, this time with soft, broken whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but it was the same voice. Wet, quiet, deliberate. Then a slow creak. I turned toward the small window by the desk. The fog outside was so thick it pressed against the glass, making it look like the forest was trying to breathe into the room. I stood there in silence, flashlight shaking in my hand. Minutes passed, maybe more. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out everything. I thought about the gun in the drawer, but couldn't bring myself to reach for it. I was afraid moving would make a sound. Then, a tap, soft against the glass. I raised the flashlight. The beam landed on a pale shape right outside the window. A hand, long thin fingers pressed against the glass. Too many joints. The nails, or what looked like nails, were black and cracked, scraping lightly as they dragged down the surface. I stumbled back, hitting the table. The radio toppled to the floor and hissed with static. Then, that same whispering voice. "You shouldn't have looked." The hand slowly slid down the glass and disappeared. I didn't move the rest of the night. I sat on the floor, back to the wall, flashlight trained on the door until dawn. When the sun came up, the forest looked normal again, calm, quiet, like nothing had happened. But outside, near the porch, I found footprints in the frost. Bare footprints, human-shaped, but wrong. The toes were too long, too narrow, and they were spaced far apart, several meters between each one, as if whatever it was leapt across the ground. I took pictures on the disposable camera they'd left in the cabin, but when I developed them later, the prints weren't there, just dirt. I called my supervisor that morning and told him I was done. He didn't argue. I packed my things and left by noon. A few days later, I found out they'd sent another guard to replace me, some guy named Derek. 2 days into his shift, he went missing. They said they found blood near the fence line and claw marks on one of the trees. The official report blamed a bear attack. But bears don't whisper, and they don't mimic your footsteps. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my apartment window made me flinch. I kept thinking about those footsteps, the way they matched mine so perfectly, like it was studying me, learning me. One night, about a month later, I decided to go camping with some friends, just to prove to myself I wasn't scared anymore. We drove out to a lake a few hours from the city. Everything was fine until the second night. I woke up around 3 a.m., the same time it all happened before, to use the bathroom. The woods were quiet. My friends were asleep. I stepped out of the tent and walked a few yards away, the ground crunching softly under my boots. And then I froze, because behind me, at a perfect delay, I heard it again. Crunch. I took one slow step forward. Crunch. It was following me, step for step. I turned around with my flashlight, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the line of trees and the empty trail beyond. I called out quietly, "Hello?" But my voice died halfway through the word. I stood there for what felt like minutes, waiting for another sound. But none came. I walked back to the tent and didn't sleep until the sun rose. I told myself it was just paranoia, the mind playing tricks after what I'd been through. But when I got home the next day and unpacked my bag, I found dirt on the bottom of my sleeping bag. The same kind of frost-hardened dirt from that outpost. And stuck to the zipper was a small pine needle, bent perfectly in half, like it had been pinched between long fingers. That was almost 10 years ago. I haven't taken another job outside city limits since, but sometimes when I'm out late, walking home after a shift or cutting through a park at night, I get that feeling again. The stillness, that too perfect silence, like the world's holding its breath, and I'll hear it. A single step matching mine. Pause when I pause. Move when I move. I don't run anymore. I just keep walking. Pretend I don't notice. Pretend it's nothing. But every time I look over my shoulder and see the empty path behind me, I remember that fog, that whisper, and those impossibly long footprints stretching off into the trees. And I can't help but think, maybe I never really left that forest. Maybe something out there followed me home. Because sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I'll catch the faintest echo of my own footsteps from somewhere just behind me. Perfectly timed, perfectly human. Except they stop. A second after I do. I worked security at a small suburban cemetery just outside the city limits. It wasn't exactly the kind of place most people would want to spend their nights, but it paid well, and the quiet suited me. The place was called Oakview Memorial Grounds, about 20 acres of fenced land, a chapel in the center, a maintenance shed, and rows upon rows of graves that disappeared into the fog on cold nights. My shift started at 10 p.m., sharp. Most nights were uneventful. I'd sit in the control room, a small office at the back of the chapel, watching a wall of 6 old security monitors that showed every corner of the property. The screens were grainy, black and white, and prone to static, but they did the job. Camera 1 covered the main gate, Camera 2 the storage shed, Cameras 3 through 5 scanned the burial rows, and Camera 6 faced the chapel door. It was the kind of job where you found peace in repetition. The hum of the heater, the faint buzz of the fluorescent light, the slow ticking of the wall clock. Every hour, my coworker, Tim, would do a perimeter walk while I kept an eye on the monitors. Then we'd switch. Simple. That was until one night, about 3 weeks into the job, when I noticed something strange on Camera 4. It was just after midnight. I was halfway through a stale sandwich when the screen started flickering. Not unusual. The system was ancient. But when the static cleared, I saw a shape on the screen. A figure standing beside one of the newer graves. At first, I thought it was just a mourner who'd stayed too long. People sometimes visited after hours, though it wasn't allowed. But the longer I watched, the less sense it made. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there. I leaned closer to the monitor. It was a woman, I could tell by the outline, wearing what looked like a white hospital gown. Her head was tilted slightly downward, her bare arms hanging stiffly by her sides. She was facing the grave marker. I grabbed my radio. "Tim, are you seeing anyone out there near the east section?" A few seconds passed. "Negative," his voice crackled back. "You sure you're not looking at an old reflection or something?" "No," I said. "Camera 4. Go check the fresh burial near the oak tree." A few minutes later, I watched Tim's flashlight beam appear on the edge of the same camera feed. He swept it across the graves, the light cutting through the darkness like a blade. But when it reached the spot where I'd seen her, there was nothing. Just a patch of disturbed soil and a bouquet of flowers lying sideways in the grass. Tim came on the radio again. "No one here, man. You probably caught some interference I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd seen. That static, That flicker, it wasn't a glitch. I'd been watching long enough to know the difference between camera noise and movement. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Maybe I wanted something weird to happen, just to break the monotony. But the next night, she came back. Same grave, same gown, same posture. Only this time, she was facing the camera. Her head was tilted slightly upward, her face pale and soft-looking through the low-res screen. But what made my stomach twist was her eyes. Cloudy, almost milky white, like she'd been underwater too long. I froze. For a long moment, I just stared. Then I reached for the zoom controls, adjusting the focus until the pixels sharpened. And that's when she blinked. It was slow, deliberate, like she was aware of me. I blinked too, instinctively. And in that fraction of a second, the feed glitched. The image was cut out. When it came back, the camera wasn't showing the grave anymore. It was showing me, sitting in the control room, from an angle that didn't exist. The hairs on my arm stood up instantly. I whipped my head around. Nothing but the empty room. I looked back at the monitor. On the screen I saw my own back, hunched over the desk, and behind me, barely visible in the dim light, stood the same woman in the hospital gown. Her hand was resting on my chair. I spun around again, my chair screeching against the floor. The room was empty. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked the corners, under the desk, even behind the door, but there was nothing. I was alone. The monitor flickered again, cutting to static. When the image returned, the feed was back to normal, just the rows of graves swaying gently in the night wind. I didn't tell Tim that time. I didn't even want to hear myself say it out loud. But from that night onward, things started getting worse. Every evening, when I came in, I'd notice the cameras had shifted slightly. Not by much, just a few degrees at first. Camera 1 pointed lower than usual. Camera 3 tilted toward the fence line. And every time I fixed them, by the next night, they'd be moved again. Then, one night, around 1:30, I was checking the feeds and realized all the cameras were slowly panning, one by one, toward the control room window. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could see it. The angles are changing. The movement is syncing together, as if they were searching for something. I felt my throat tighten. I stood up, trying to tell myself it was some kind of system glitch, maybe a short in the motor circuits. But then camera 4, the one that had shown the woman, snapped directly toward the control room, dead center. The screen flickered. Static hissed through the speakers. Then faintly, I heard it. A whisper. It was coming through the monitor speakers. I leaned closer, heart hammering. "Do you see me?" I stumbled back, nearly knocking my chair over. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the radio. "Tim," I shouted. "Get back to the office right now." No response. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. The whisper came again, louder this time, stretched and distorted like someone speaking through water. "Do you see me now?" I bolted for the breaker box and yanked the main power switch. The screens went black instantly. The entire room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock and my ragged breathing. I left the monitors off for the rest of the night. Sat in the dark with my flashlight pointed at the door. When Tim came back from patrol around 3 a.m., he said he'd been chasing down a motion sensor alert near the west fence. Said he didn't hear my calls on the radio at all. I didn't tell him what happened. But by the next night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I arrived for my shift, all 6 monitors were already on. I hadn't turned them on. Each camera was pointing directly at the control room window. I walked inside slowly, feeling my stomach twist tighter with every step. The monitors were glowing faintly, bathing the room in cold, gray light. I could hear the faint static hum, like breathing. Then, camera 4 flickered again. The woman was back, standing inches away from the camera, her face filling the entire screen. Her mouth was slightly open, and her skin looked wrong. Too smooth, like stretched wax. Her cloudy eyes rolled upward until only the whites showed. Then the feed cut to black. When it came back, I saw myself again, sitting at the desk. But this time, I wasn't alone. She was right behind me. Her hand was on my shoulder. The skin on her arm looked gray, bloated, like something pulled from deep water. And there was dirt under her nails. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then on the screen, she leaned forward. Her face moved closer to mine, pixelated, flickering, until her lips brushed my ear. And the whisper came again, not through the speakers this time, but right behind me. "Do you see me now?" I swung around, screaming, the chair toppling backward. The room was empty. I unplugged everything that night. Every cable, every power strip. I even ripped the cords from the wall. The screens died with a faint pop, and for the first time in weeks, the control room was silent. I thought it was over. But when I got home that morning, exhausted and shaking, my phone screen lit up by itself on the nightstand. The display flickered, the same grainy gray I'd stared at for hours in that room. And then it showed me lying in my bed, from above, from an angle that didn't exist. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I saw movement, a shadow rising behind me on the screen. The same silhouette, the same figure in the hospital gown. Her hand reached out, slow and deliberate, and rested on my shoulder. That's when I actually felt it. Cold, wet, heavy. I jolted awake, gasping. The phone was still on the floor where I'd thrown it. The screen was cracked, still glowing faintly, showing nothing but static. I smashed it with a hammer the next morning, bought a new one, never went back to the cemetery again. But here's the part that keeps me up at night, the part I can't explain. Every time I close my eyes, I still feel that same cold touch on my shoulder. And when the room gets quiet enough, I can hear the faint buzz of static in my ears. Sometimes, when I wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, I'll see a flicker of light on the wall, a reflection like from a screen. And for just a second, I swear I can see her there, standing behind me, face tilted toward mine, her cloudy eyes wide and unblinking, waiting for me to check the feed again. I used to work the night shift at an old shopping mall, Hollow Mall. Even the name felt like a warning. Hollow, empty, lifeless. But when you're behind on rent, you don't really care what a place is called. You just clock in, do your hours, and pray the night goes by fast. The mall had been shut down for almost 7 years. A fire tore through part of the food court and left half the structure blackened and unsafe. They said a grease trap exploded, but the real cause never made the news. Some company was still renting a few of the spaces for storage, so they needed security there 24/7. That's where I came in. My partner Joe was a stocky guy in his 40s, bald head, heavy mustache, the kind of guy who called everyone Chief. He'd been doing security work for decades and had stories for every kind of night. Junkies, burglars, even a raccoon that supposedly stole his lunch once. When I started, he laughed and said, "Kid, you'll be begging for something to happen by week 2. He wasn't wrong. The first few nights were painfully dull. The only sounds were the low hum of the ventilation and the echo of my boots on the shiny tile. The air inside smelled like dust and disinfectant, mixed with that faint burnt scent that never fully left after the fire. The place was too quiet. Even our footsteps sounded like they didn't belong there. Our security office sat next to what used to be a pretzel shop. Just a small room with old monitors, a radio, and a coffee machine that spat out sludge. Every hour, we'd take turns doing rounds. My route covered the ground floor, the old-fashioned outlets, the toy store, and the entrance to the food court. Joe handled the upper floor, mostly furniture storage and the burnt section. The first time I noticed something strange was around 2:15 a.m. I was sitting at the desk, half asleep, when I heard this faint humming. It wasn't the ventilation. It was lower, mechanical, like something whirring. I got up, followed the sound down the corridor, and stopped in front of the escalators. They were moving. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but no. The metal steps were gliding upward, slow and steady. The escalators had been disconnected from power months ago. There was even caution tape across the bottom step. I stared for maybe 10 seconds before the movement just stopped. No sound, no light, nothing. I went back to the office and told Joe. He just laughed and said, "Old wiring." This place is a Frankenstein of bad circuits. I wanted to believe that, but when I replayed the camera feed, the escalator wasn't moving at all. Not once. On the screen it was perfectly still. That should have been the first red flag. A week later, I started noticing the mannequins. There were dozens scattered throughout the mall, leftovers from old stores. Most were naked or half-dressed, limbs missing, glossy faces blank and pale. I never liked them, but I didn't pay them much attention, until one morning during my patrol, I found one sitting on a bench in front of the closed salon. Legs crossed, arms folded neatly in its lap, like a person waiting for a bus. I laughed it off. Maybe Joe was trying to mess with me. When I mentioned it, he swore he hadn't touched it. The next night, there were two mannequins sitting side by side on that same bench. Both are facing the camera. Joe checked the feed, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He paused the video, rewound it, then played it again, frame by frame. The mannequins were standing at first. Then between two frames, they were sitting. The timestamp skipped 3 seconds, glitched, as if those seconds never existed. He looked at me and muttered, "Must be some corrupted feed." But that didn't explain what I found on my next round. Near the fountain in the center of the mall, the one that hadn't worked in years, I found one of the mannequins leaning against the railing, its head tilted up toward the ceiling, as if it were listening. I tried to ignore it, keep moving, keep breathing normally, but I swear I felt eyes on me, like the air itself was watching. That night, Joe and I decided to patrol together. We both carried flashlights, though the place had emergency lights scattered around. It was about 1:50 a.m. when we reached the upper floor, the burnt section. That part of the mall was darker, colder. The walls were covered in black soot, and the smell of charred wood still hung in the air, like the fire had only just gone out. "Stay close," Joe whispered. I nodded. Half the ceiling had caved in, exposing the skeleton of the roof above. Every sound echoed too long. Our steps, the click of the flashlight button, even our breathing. We stopped at an old electronics store where they stored boxes now. Joe wanted to check the back exit lock, so I waited near the front, staring into the glass display cases. They were empty, except for a few mannequin torsos piled inside like discarded dolls. That's when I heard it. Joe spun around, but it was still again. We stood there for what felt like a full minute, our flashlights trembling. "Let's go," he muttered finally. We headed back to the office. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the shift. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself I imagined it. Sleep deprivation, bad lighting, whatever. But the next night, when Joe didn't show up for work, I started to worry. I called him, texted him, nothing. His car wasn't in the lot either. The supervisor said he probably overslept, so I was alone that night. Around 2 a.m., the cameras started flickering. One by one, each screen cut to static for a few seconds, then came back. Except camera 6, the one facing the burnt section, it stayed black. I tried to reset the system, but the feed wouldn't reconnect. That's when the radio crackled. It was faint at first, just static. Then a voice, barely audible. "Don't look at them when they move." I froze. It was Joe's voice. I called out his name on the radio. No response. Just a long, low hiss. Then silence. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe it was a prank. Either way, I had to check. The upper level felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that sits in your lungs. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on scorched walls and debris. Everything smelled faintly metallic, like rust and smoke. When I reached the electronics store, I noticed something on the floor. A flashlight. Joe's flashlight. Still on, rolling slightly as if it had just been dropped. "Joe," I called. My voice echoed too long. No answer. Then from deeper inside, I heard a sound. A shuffle. Not footsteps. More like dragging. Slow. Heavy. I shone my light ahead and saw a movement behind the display counter. A shape rising slowly, smooth and pale. At first I thought it was Joe crouched down, but then the light caught it fully. It was one of the mannequins, standing, its face blank, glossy, reflecting my beam. My breath caught. Another one moved beside it, then another. Their joints creaked faintly, plastic arms twitching in small, unnatural jerks. They weren't walking, more like sliding forward, a few inches at a time. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. Their heads turned toward me, one by one, like synchronized puppets. No eyes, no expressions, just hollow human shapes frozen mid-motion. The walkie hissed again. "Don't look at them." I dropped it. The mannequins stopped moving when my light was directly on them, completely still. But when I turned away, when I blinked, they were closer. I backed up until I hit the railing. My mind screamed to run, but my body wouldn't move. One mannequin's arm lifted, slow and deliberate, as if pulled by invisible strings. I bolted. I ran through the corridor, down the escalator, and through the main floor. My footsteps echoed like thunder. I didn't look back, didn't breathe until I was outside under the cold air, hands shaking so hard, I dropped my keys twice. I called the cops from my car, told them my partner was missing. They searched the place the next day, said they didn't find anything. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no blood. Just Joe's flashlight and his badge, lying in the burnt food court. They said he probably left in the night, ran off, but Joe wasn't that kind of guy. He'd worked there for 10 years. He didn't just walk away. I quit the next morning, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. A week later, I saw a news post online. Hollow Mall was being demolished. Part of me felt relief, like maybe tearing it down would bury whatever was inside. But when I scrolled through the demolition photos, one image stopped me cold. It showed the remains of the central fountain, the cracked tiles, the debris, the twisted metal, and sitting right there in the rubble was a mannequin head, propped up perfectly. Around its neck hung a scorched security badge, Joe's badge. I stared at that picture for a long time, telling myself it was fake, maybe photoshopped, but the detail was too clear. The burn marks, the melted edge of the plastic, even the faint scratch across the badge where Joe once dropped it. I closed my laptop and didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. And yet, even after all these years, the memories cling to me. Whenever I walk past department stores or clothing outlets, I catch myself glancing at the mannequins, just to make sure they're still. But sometimes, when I'm too close, when I stop to look at the way their faces reflect the light, I swear I feel the same air shift, like something holding its breath. And I'll notice one head tilted slightly in my direction, just enough to see the shine of its blank, perfect eyes. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe that place got under my skin. But deep down, I know what I saw. And sometimes, in the dead silence of the night, I still hear Joe's voice in the back of my mind. Faint, distant, and broken through static. Don't look at them when they move.